Welcome to Resiliency Within. I am your host, Elaine Miller-Karras, and today's guest is Dr. Tara Well, and she will share with us mirror meditation and how it can help us view ourselves with greater clarity and thrive, which I think we're all interested in that, Dr. Well. Her new book is entitled Mirror Meditation, The Power of Neuroscience and Self-Reflection to Overcome Criticism, Gain Confidence, and See Yourself. That's quite a title, by the way. So
yes,
we're just
indeed.
we're going to call it mirror meditation from here on out. All right.
Great.
So Tara, is it okay if I call you Tara? Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
All right. So she has her PhD. She's an associate professor of psychology at Barnard College of Columbia University in New York, where she developed a mirror-based meditation. And it's been called a revelation in the New York Times. As an expert on self-awareness, body image, self-compassion, emotional resilience, and meditation, she has appeared on NBC Nightly News and has been quoted in the New York Times, Boston Globe, Washington Post, Bloomberg, Vox, Vice, Forbes, Harper's Bazaar, Shape, Allure, and other media publications. And now we can add Resiliency Within to that. And her Psychology Today blog, which is quite impressive, by the way, is called The Clarity and has over 1.5 million readers. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elaine. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we are so anxious to hear about your ideas and your thoughts. But before we do that, why don't we just check in to see how you're doing today? What's on your mind as we start today?
Well, it's a beautiful day here. I'm in New Haven, Connecticut, looking out at my wonderful view of the Quinnipiac River, actually. And yeah, just really excited to be here. I've been doing a lot of different promotions for the book. I was actually on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah last week.
Oh my gosh, how exciting is that?
Talking about small talk with Michael Costa. So I was hearing from people who saw me on The Daily Show and just very excited to be on your podcast today and share more about mirror meditation with your audience.
Well, I'm so glad that you're here. And I guess what I've been thinking about this week is Queen Elizabeth. I mean, I've never not been on the planet without thinking about her as just being kind of the stalwart of decency and compassion. And that's one of the questions I want to actually ask you about, is about compassion. So I guess I'm thinking about her and just that as a strong woman, the influence she had on the world. And I think you're being one of those strong women and influencing the world with your book. So that gets me to my first question. So what is it about your life experience that brought you to create mirror meditation?
Well, first of all, I don't think that I could hold a candle to Queen Elizabeth in terms of everything that she's done and the sort of role that she upheld for so many years and the sense of duty that she had. I think we owe her all a tremendous, debt of gratitude of all that she's done. And I think, her kindness as well. They had a number of really interesting clips of some of her humor with the Paddington Bear and the photo of her with her husband dressed up as one of the guards and her laughing. And I just love those images of her, those lighter moments of her life that she, that she was able to have some relief and have a lot of joy in her life, in addition to, a very serious sense of duty.
Yes. And I also love the little clip she did with Daniel Craig, the 007 clip.
That was great.
She was a good sport, a very, very good sport.
Yeah. Not taking yourself too seriously. And that's kind of what my work is about too, with the mirror meditation. It's not about taking it too seriously. There are some aspects to it that, the mirror can evoke a lot of self-criticism for people. And I invite people to not take it too seriously, but just to look and to be curious. I've always had a fascination with mirrors my whole life. I remember when I was a little girl, we used to have a chrome toaster on the table, and it, created a nice reflective image. And I would make all these faces and everything in the chrome toaster for as long as my parents would let me every day. And then, as I grew older, I kind of developed more of a less positive relationship with the mirror, because I started to use the mirror to criticize my appearance and to compare it to fashion models in magazines and people on TV who had these perfect images. And I think, like many young women and people in general just start to associate the mirror with finding flaws and faults with their appearance. But then over time, I started to use the mirror in meditation. And this came about because one day I was just like kind of walking around my apartment, doing chores and whatnot. And I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. And I noticed like how kind of like sad and distressed I looked. And I hadn't realized I had felt that way. But the mirror kind of like reflected that to me. I'm like, so I started to meditate with the mirror. I had been developing I had yoga and meditation practice for many years. And a lot of, one school of thought with yoga is that you do these yoga and stretches so that you can sit for a long period of time in meditation. So your body is comfortable to sit for a long time in meditation. So after I would do yoga, I would meditate, and then I would close my eyes and my mind would drift in all these different directions and different things. And I tried just breathing and focusing and breathing and focusing. And then I decided, just to open my eyes, because I oftentimes used a mirror to help me do my yoga for my yoga positions. And so just to look at myself, my face as I was meditating, and to focus on my eyes as a drishti, or the focal point. And I really discovered quite a bit about myself. Once I got beyond that surface layer of wanting to criticize myself for, a wrinkle, a flaw, a lump of flesh that I didn't want to be there or something. And I looked deeper into my own eyes, something really clicked and changed for me. And it became a very useful way for me to be in contact with myself. And it's like I naturally developed a sense of compassion. It wasn't like I was working hard to feel compassionate and say compassionate things and think compassionately, but it was just like, oh, I see myself. And there was an aspect that it's like I can almost see my own suffering. I see how my thoughts are making me suffer because I can see it on my face.
And do you think it was more looking into your eyes and looking at your entire face in terms of the focal point?
Yeah, I think it was my eyes, my face, and it was also, having all the other information, such as my body sensations, such as where was I feeling tense, and then where did my face look tense, and what thoughts went along with that tension that I saw, and how did my breathing change when I looked at myself or I thought a critical thought. You can watch your breathing in the mirror, and you can see how your thoughts actually change that. So it was a combination of being able to look at my physical body, being able to watch my face and track my thoughts and my breathing, and just my body sensations of looking at myself. And it was a tremendous amount of information to process and to think about that I was very useful to me. So I thought it might be useful to other people too.
Well, I think it's so interesting because I was sharing with you about the community resiliency model, which is something that I've developed. And the core aspect of it is body sensation awareness. It's called interoceptive awareness. And so that's what I'm hearing from you. But can I ask you a question about it? When you notice, let's say, if there was distress in your face, would you, with any intentionality, try to relax your facial muscles? Or was it noticing the distress and following it and then to see what happened?
It would depend, because you could do both. One of the things that I like to suggest to people who are doing mirror meditation is to simply be with yourself, get to know yourself without trying to fix or change anything. Because oftentimes, people who are interested in meditation and some of these techniques, they're on a pretty rigorous self-improvement program. And that in and of itself can be kind of brutal. So what you want to do is to just like hang out with yourself and see what comes up. Try not to be too unkind to yourself, but just be really curious. If I sit with myself for 10 minutes with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and I just look at myself silently and be silent, what is that experience like for me? If I didn't have to do anything to change anything, make it better, or
almost kind of like a radical self-acceptance of just the way you are.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering if you could, having read a little bit about your work, that you talk about there's 3 principles in mindfulness meditation. Could you say what those three principles are and how that is connected to mirror meditation?
Sure. Well, the 3 basic principles of mindfulness are, first, keeping your attention in the present moment. So this is just, again, bringing your attention back to yourself to what's happening currently, not thinking about what's going to happen in the future, not thinking about what's happening in the past. And then the second principle is to have an open awareness. So this is meditating with yourself in the mirror with, again, not having an agenda, nothing to fix, nothing to change, nothing to improve, nothing to compare yourself to of how good you're doing it compared to other people or anything. Just being with yourself and being curious. And also what I suggest to people is consider the possibility that there are ways to see yourself that you haven't discovered yet. There are things about yourself that you haven't discovered yet, no matter how much life experience you have. And having that orientation, it really gives you some space to change and grow and to experience things that, you might not think are possible.
Well, one of the thoughts I had as I was reading more about what you have written and is that I've worked with so many people over the years. They could have 3 PhDs and be the most accomplished person, be on the media every day, being asked their opinion. And then behind the closed doors is the most incredible self-criticism that is almost paralyzing in their personal relationships. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, because I know that self-criticism is one of the things that you highlight about how can we deal with that self-criticism by, and I'm thinking, looking in the mirror, really? Oh gosh, is that going to really help me?
Right. And that brings me to the third principle, which is having a kind intention toward yourself too. Because if you're just looking and scrutinizing, then you can end up being very unkind, and the mirror can be a tool to be cruel to yourself, more cruel than you normally are. So you don't want to do that. But having a kind intention, just orienting toward yourself as though, it sounds a little cheesy and cliche, but as though you're looking at a friend, someone you love, someone you care about. And also one of the things too is when you notice that you're looking at yourself and you're criticizing yourself, see if you can shift your focus, instead of being the object of your criticism, to seeing yourself from the perspective of the receiver of that criticism. Look into your eyes and see the person who's being criticized rather than the person who needs to be fixed. And that can oftentimes create a tremendous shift, because it's like once people realize that it's an inside job, they're doing it to themselves. Okay. I mean, you might have critical people in your life who are criticizing you, but when you're doing a mirror meditation, it's just you in the mirror and criticisms come up. That's your habit. That's your orientation toward yourself. And that's a place where maybe you can create a little bit more space, or think about how to be kinder, or just let it go a little bit.
Well, and you would talk about that self-critic. I mean, that self-critic can be driving your bus. So that's all that you see is what you're not doing right. And I think the other aspect of, I was thinking about the social media. I remember I felt like I was pretty naive about what people did in terms of photographs. I had no idea that they actually would Photoshop things and take away wrinkles and things that were, I guess, not perfect. And so then we're always holding ourselves up to something that's not real.
Yeah, indeed. Well, and that's one of the one of the stories in my book. I've worked with some people who are, influencers on social media, and one of the problems that they discover is because all their images are photoshopped, that then they develop social anxiety to see people in person because they realize they look so different.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So it creates more anxiety and more self-criticism because they can't live up to the image that they've created. So I encourage people who tend to be very image focused to do the mirror meditation with no makeup. First thing in the morning, just roll out of bed and, sit in front of the mirror and just take a look for 10 minutes.
Well, I can imagine that the whole world needs to do this. I mean, I was thinking about, of course, influencers, actors, but I mean, I think what teenagers do to themselves when they compare themselves to something that is, obviously not attainable by many people. But so that kind of goes into segue into my next, some of the questions I want to ask you. And you shared that your students and practitioners have shared with you the benefits that they've learned. I mean, including illuminating their ability to solve problems, providing perspective on their experiences, validating hunches and intuition, building a vault of creative ideas, fostering gratitude. This seems like this needs to be in the water. So can you talk a little bit about these wonderful attributes that people have shared with you, and tell us a little bit more about it.
Yes. Well, the three main things that people discover just from doing the mirror meditation, and then I'll also talk a little bit about the video journaling practice that kind of goes in conjunction with the mirror meditation. But from just doing the mirror meditation, the first thing that people really notice is just how critical they are with themselves. Because oftentimes we have this inner critic running in the background, and people don't realize that it's there all the time, and it really affects the quality of their life and the quality of certainly their relationship with themselves. So bringing that to the forefront and realizing how much you're affected by these critical thoughts is really the first step in changing them, and having the motivation to change your relationship with yourself from that perspective. And then the second thing is people became much more aware of their emotions, because oftentimes we have social display rules in which we get trained not to share certain emotions, so-called negative emotions, usually fear, anger, sadness, and disgust. We want to just be like, oh, and oftentimes, when we're just smiling, we have that nice pleasant social smile on our face, and we're feeling other feelings that we're not supposed to share. Sometimes doing that habitually, we can actually lose contact with what we really are feeling. We don't realize that we're sad or angry or feel disgusted by something someone said or did, and that it's kind of showing up momentarily on our faces, but we don't have that reflection. So being able to create a safe space for you to sit with yourself and feel all your emotions, letting all your thoughts and emotions come out, even if they're, you don't want to share them with other people. In a sense, you create a sense of intimacy with yourself. So you develop a way of trusting yourself to be able to share anything you're feeling, anything you're thinking with yourself.
Well, can I ask? Yeah. Can I ask a question? So once people start, let's say they use the mirror meditation and they begin to be aware. So their awareness, even when they're not looking in the mirror, expands. So do you find that people don't necessarily need to look at the mirror to have that degree of deep self-reflection?
Yes, after they've been doing it for a while, they'll be much more aware of their emotions than perhaps they were. And the other thing is, we use other people as reflections for us. So, we have a friend saying, "Well, you look kind of sad today. Would that make you angry, what I just said?" Or something like that, that kind of like helps us to regulate. We need face-to-face contact to regulate our emotions. And as we get less face-to-face contact because of social isolation, because we spend more time looking at our screens than we do looking at each other, we actually can become emotionally dysregulated simply because we don't have the face-to-face contact. So,
okay. So it has to be in person. Because here we're on Zoom right now. And I'm just saying, I think I've looked at myself more in the last 2 years than I have in my entire life.
Right. And so it's helping people to get comfortable with that. Hold on just a second.
So I think as we're talking about this is just such an important element because of, many of us spend a lot of our lives on Zoom right now. And so, but it's a little bit different because it may not be as intentional as what you're doing with, you're saying, okay, this is my time for mirror meditation. I guess that's another question I have. I would love for you to continue to illuminate the different benefits of it, but how long do you suggest as people are starting to practice? How long should they do this?
I recommend 10 minutes a day. And, you can work up to that, and you can also just sit with yourself, and you don't necessarily have to gaze into your eyes for 10 full minutes, but just sitting with yourself. You can oftentimes too focus on your breathing. You can watch your collarbones move up and down as you breathe. I recommend doing some deep breaths and some, like a little bit of a progressive relaxation as you sit with yourself. Because you can sometimes, you want to keep your gaze very soft because you can almost bore a hole into your, look, really staring very carefully. You can almost start to hallucinate almost, or having stranger visual things happen. So you want to keep your gaze soft, and you want to, keep coming back to seeing your full self if you kind of start focusing in. And then, just getting used to that and seeing what it's like to be with yourself is really key.
And so as people start to do this, then, I mean, again, illuminating their ability to solve problems, how does that happen? Why do you think if you do this, all of a sudden you're sparked by thinking, oh, I can handle this problem now? What is it about it that causes that?
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, one of the other practices that I talk about in the book is video journaling. And video journaling is basically just making a video journal 10 minutes every day, just saying whatever's on your mind, letting that be a free flow. If you know of the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron,
Oh,
she
yes. I
talks
read it
about
8 years ago. Yes.
the
Yes.
morning pages, writing
Yes. Yes.
three pages longhand of anything that comes to mind. Well, this is like a video morning pages where you just blah, 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 talk for 10 minutes about everything that's on your mind. And through the content, through doing that for a number of well, I've done it for a number of years, and many of my students have done it for a period of time. And what happens with that is, one of the things that happens, some psychological processes that happen in terms of our memory and how we perceive things is when things work out fine, we forget about them. When something bad happens, we have a negativity bias and we tend to remember things that didn't work out well, that hurt, that felt bad, and then things that we don't complete. Things that we wanted to do that we didn't get to do, we remember. But everything that we did well, that worked out, we just kind of forget about. So when you have a video journal, you have a record of sort of like the things that have worked out. And how a video journal is kind of different than just doing a written journal is seeing yourself on video in the moment that these things happen, that these good things happen, that bad things happen, that they have problems and you don't know how to solve the problems. And then you look back 6 months later, and you're like, I can't believe how upset I was about that, and now it's completely solved. I figured it out, So you develop confidence because you see how many problems you solved that you just forgot about because you solved them.
Well, so then after you do your video journal, then part of the process is you have to go back and watch them. Is that
you have to review them? Yeah.
Okay.
You have to review them.
And so do you review them like after a month, after 2 months? What is your suggestion? And when you go back?
It's up to you. Sometimes I recommend to people, like, for instance, if you reviewed your video journal, like a significant day, like your birthday or an anniversary of something that happened in your life, go back every 6 months or every year to that day and see how much you've changed, or go back to, right before something happened. We all have these goals of things that we want to happen in our lives. And there are times when it feels like it's never going to happen. There's never going to happen.
Change. Yeah.
And then it does, and so you go back to a time like a few years earlier when you were feeling discouraged and you say, oh, it really did happen. It really did work out. And the other thing I suggest that people do is, oftentimes people deal with, self-doubt and anxiety and things like that. And to make a 10-minute video journal when you're having a great day, when you're feeling confident, everything's going well, you're feeling very calm and just optimistic, and just make a video journal talking to yourself, reassuring yourself that you're fine and everything's fine and that you have the confidence to deal with anything. And then watch that back when you're having a bad day.
Well, that's so interesting because, we say how powerful films are, right? That we've all been impacted by certain films. But then you're saying, oh, I'm watching a film of myself of something that actually turned out well. So that must be in and of itself reinforcing on your life journey.
Yes, totally. And again, it's great to also have like a group of friends or a life partner who's there to remind you of these things. But oftentimes, given how relationships change and we move and it's hard to stay connected to people, you can always stay disconnected to yourself. So, sounds a little cheesy, but your relationship with yourself is the longest relationship in your life. So you really want to take care of it and keep a record of it. Well, keep a record of what's happened.
So you're sparking all sorts of ideas for you. One of the questions I want to ask you, have you ever done this where you've had, let's say, I know because you teach, that you have a group of students and their assignment is to do video journaling, and then you get together and share your video journals together? And can there be a group process that can also be enhancing your kind of co-regulation with others?
Well, I generally advise people to keep their video journals private, because one of the things that happens is, we self-censor. So we're in a lot of situations where we need to self-censor, even with our partners, our families, people that are closest to us. Chances are we don't want to say everything that is on our mind because, that can be distressing to other people. Right. So so it's good that you have a certain way of communicating with yourself that's only for yourself. I do occasionally suggest if people are having difficulties or they're trying to sort out big problems, that they make video journals, review them, and then maybe review them with their therapist or a good friend in order to get some perspective. But I try to discourage people from making video journals to show to other people, because that's kind of what we're doing on social media as it is, of, talking up all the great things about ourselves and trying to be entertaining and fun for other people. And so the idea behind your own private video journaling practice is to let your guard down and just to really see yourself feeling all your emotions, and really see yourself feeling more vulnerable and less guarded than you might in social situations.
Well, because then you also run the risk of the critics that happen in other people. And then that's kind of the absolute opposite that you're trying to do for learning about the self. And would that?
Right. Well, yes. One of the things I think is running in the background all the time for us is whether or not we're going to be rejected or accepted by other people based on what we say.
Yeah.
And being able to let go of that thought or that sense of needing to censor oneself, it can be very liberating.
Well, Tara, I am just enjoying this conversation so much. We're going to take a short break in just a minute, but what I'm hoping that you will do when we come back, there's a couple questions, and I know I want to talk about the neuroscience behind this work, because I know that there is evidence that this really does work. And the other question I have is about, many of my listeners could have an eating challenge, they call them eating disorders. And I'm wondering if this can be an effective way to help. And I imagine you might need to work with a therapist, but if you could illuminate us a little bit about that when we come back from the break, I think that would be really helpful. So stay tuned, listeners. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to be back with Dr. Tara Well, and she's going to share more about mirror meditation. Welcome back. This is Elaine Miller-Karras, and I am talking to Dr. Tara Well, and we are talking about her book, Mirror Meditation. And we've had a wonderful conversation so far, and we need to learn more about this. I'm asking her right now, kind of segue into talking about the neuroscience behind mirror meditation. So what do we need to know about what we're learning about really the evidence behind why this is an important practice?
Well, one of the things that the mirror does is it externalizes what's sort of happening inside our minds, so that we can take a look at it on our faces. So one of the ways that some of the studies that have been done on using mirrors, and you might have heard of Louise Hay developed something called mirror work many years ago, in which she suggested saying positive affirmations to yourself in the mirror. And for years, that was just thought of as something kind of anecdotal or kind of like folk psychology. But a recent study that was done by Nicola Petroshki showed that actually saying compassionate phrases in front of a mirror has some self-soothing effects. So there were 3 conditions in the experiment. Well, first of all, they asked people to come up with some compassionate, reassuring things they would say to a friend who was, feeling distressed, and that they wanted to express some compassion to a friend. And so they had the phrases. And then in one condition, the people said the phrases to themselves, just plain. And another condition, they were just looked at themselves in the mirror. And in a third condition, they said the phrases and looked at themselves in the mirror. And they found that actually saying these compassionate phrases to themselves in the mirror had a self-soothing effect, meaning in neuroscience, there are ways that we can use certain types of emotional states to downward regulate. So when we're feeling very distressed, we tend to be in a state of sort of over arousal. So we're always trying to find out ways that we can relax into our bodies and self-regulate. and basically saying these compassionate phrases help people downward regulate and actually help them to stay calm. So, and that was measured through physiological changes as well as changes in the brain. So it's not just in your imagination when you say positive things that you feel better, but it's a real physiological change that takes place. And so working with the mirror and working with your feelings and then developing a way to soothe yourself as you look at using the mirror as a self-soothing tool really does work if you're willing to, you know, give it a try and get past those initial self-criticisms.
Well, so, and that was kind of my other question about, you know, people with eating disorders oftentimes do not have a good relationship with their body, sometimes do not like to look at themselves in the mirror and see every flaw. Like, talk about the negativity bias is incredibly amplified. So could you say a little bit about how mirror meditation could help? And if it could help, does someone need to be working with a therapist with that specialty? Just let us know a little bit more about your opinion about that.
Right. Well, I do talk about a little bit about body dysmorphic disorder in the book, which is basically when people use the mirror to find some kind of flaw that they see in their body, whether it's something that only they see or something very small, but it kind of gets very magnified in their minds. And actually, looking at brain scans of people with this disorder shows that they have a very, very narrow focus in terms of where they look when they look in the mirror. So they can't see their whole selves. They focus on one little tiny flaw. So actually some psychotherapists who specialize in body image and eating disorders actually use the mirror as part of their psychotherapy. Now it's kind of like a double-edged sword in a sense, because you can use the mirror to be very brutal and practice your body dysmorphic disorder. So what I would recommend is, if you have a tendency to do that, that you do see a licensed psychotherapist. You know, if you find that you can't stop not looking at a certain flaw and that that's causing you a lot of distress, then you should definitely, you know, seek out the help of a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in eating disorders. But it's actually a distortion of how we see people with that disorder see themselves when they look in the mirror. And the other thing that we find is sometimes people ask me like about narcissism, and isn't it narcissistic to look at yourself in the mirror? Well, the research that shows when people who have narcissistic personality disorder or any kind of distortion in their self-image, they tend not to be able to see their emotions and the emotions of other people as readily, but they get stuck on some kind of surface characteristic, some kind of thing about their appearance, either something that they love about themselves or something that they dread about themselves. But in my view, it seems to be sort of like almost an emotion regulation strategy. So in other words, if someone with body dysmorphic disorder, if they're focused on, you know, they don't like their nose or they don't like some little aspect of their appearance, they're focused on that. But if they kind of panned out and saw themselves more broadly, they might be overwhelmed by some of their emotions, by some of the other things that are happening in their lives that they also don't feel that they can control. So working with a licensed therapist, I think, would be a good idea. And also, what I oftentimes ask people to do when they first start doing mirror meditation is, you know, as you look at yourself, keeping your gaze soft, what is your general affective tone toward yourself? When you first look at yourself, when you just glance at yourself, and even not even doing mirror meditation, you know, you're in an elevator or you walk past a pane of glass and you see yourself, you see your reflection. What's the affective tone? What, you know, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it sad? Is it angry? Do you feel vulnerable? You know, how do you feel when you just glance at yourself?
Because you can use this as a vehicle for greater self-understanding, and also more information to share with your therapist. If you find, oh my gosh, every time I look at a mirror, I actually don't want to look at the mirror. I try to not look at myself. So, you know, what does that say about you if you don't want to look at yourself at all in the mirror, right? I imagine there's all sorts of implications of that.
Right. And I mean, and a lot of people do tell me, they say, oh, I can never do that. I don't want to look at myself in the mirror.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what does that say about your relationship to yourself? And oftentimes too, we want to be in relationships with other people where they know us very deeply and they see us and they love and appreciate us. But are we really willing to do that for ourselves? To be seen, to allow ourselves to be seen by ourselves first.
Right. So let me ask you about a little bit more about this, because I've been concerned about the world the last few years about sometimes seeing a great lack of compassion for people who have different ideas than ourselves, and sometimes, really vilifying others if they don't quite think exactly the way we do. And being concerned about, the implications of that for our children, how we communicate with one another if there's no tolerance for differences. And to me, it has a lot to do with not only self-compassion, but compassion for others. And if you can make a comment about how mirror meditation could be helpful.
Yeah, I think that it's, with social media and our ways of communicating these days, in my view, I don't know that things are necessarily getting worse in terms of people's intolerance and vilification of each other who have different ideas. I think it's just more prevalent, and we see it more because people have all these vehicles to communicate on Twitter, on different types of social media, so that it's kind of like, maybe people have been thinking this all along and now they're actually saying it.
Possible, right? Possible.
And this is the first step toward healing it, towards awareness of how people see each other. And I oftentimes think, like, what if we lived in a world where everyone could read each other's minds? What if we knew exactly what people were thinking about us, exactly what we're at? And maybe Twitter is the like the awkward precursor to that. And so it's training us to go, oh, well, when I say that, it really hurts people. Or when I say that about myself, it really hurts me. Or when this happens. And so it's like, how can we manage all? It's like a big emotion regulation experiment on a global scale.
Yeah, and sometimes there's no integrity GPS in that system that's been created.
Right. Well, that's one of the. It didn't make it into the book. I had several other chapters I wanted to write that didn't quite make it in the book, but one of them is what I call an integrity exercise, which is like, can you look yourself in the eye in the mirror after you said it, after you did it, after you thought it?
I think that needs to be your next book. I think we need this more than ever right now. Well, so, and I guess that's the other question I have too, is about, along with what I've been noticing in the world. And I think there's been we know there's an amplification of anxiety and depression amongst young people and also elders. So how can mirror meditation help with anxiety management? Or can it?
I think it can. Like I said, it can work both ways too, because in one sense, it can magnify your anxiety. If you're just looking at the mirror, freaking out, being anxious, it's going to be worse. But you want to use some of these tools that I have in the book, which is kind of, one of them is monitoring your self-talk. There's some very good research that shows that if you switch your self-talk to the third person, so if I say, Tara's feeling anxious instead of I'm feeling anxious, it gives me some distance. And in that distance, I can develop a perspective. I can develop some compassion. I can give myself a little bit of space to figure out what I want to do. So talking to yourself in the third person in the mirror might sound like a kooky idea.
It sounds a little bit different. I'm going, Elaine, you need to, Elaine, maybe you shouldn't have said that. And it's like if my husband came in the room, he's going, what are you doing, honey? What are you doing?
Right.
Yes.
Right. So, it's worth a try. The other thing I talk about in the book is the difference between the inner critic and the inner nurturer. The inner nurturer is the idea that we have critical voices that live in our heads, but we also have a kind voice that lives in our head. And the critical voices usually drown out the kind voices. But if you can find a kind voice, maybe that comes from a parent or a teacher or a loved one who, what would they say in this situation? Well, how would they respond, so that you have the two voices. And I actually have what I call a slinky exercise, the old toy that we used to have with the and what, in one hand you have your inner critic, and in the other hand you have your inner nurturer, and you go back and forth with the two hands when you're processing something, a situation that you regret, or something that you're feeling anxious about, or a decision you have to make, and just that prominent critical voice. But then what's the nurturing voice saying? What does the kind voice in you say to this, to make sure you give that kind voice airtime?
And so do you do the video journaling with the kind voice and the critic voice? Is that would that be an exercise, that a tool that you feel that would be useful?
You can, yes, you can do it with both, or you can just do it with sitting in front of the mirror. The thing about watching back your video journal when you've been kind of unkind to yourself, and then you come back to it a couple of days later when you're feeling better, and you see yourself and you see, oh my God, I'm so unkind. Ooh, how can I be so mean to myself? Oh my gosh, Yeah. And so that's another way you get perspective, because again, if if we're fortunate enough to have someone in our life who's always there, who's giving us moment to moment really kind and accurate feedback, that's great. But oftentimes we have to kind of rely on ourselves for that in a number of contexts, because other people are just doing what they're doing, and they're also filtering their reflections of us through their own needs and their own ideas about us that aren't necessarily the same as ours are. So it's important to be able to discern, feedback from other people that's worthwhile, from that probably we don't need to focus on too much, right? Because that's the other thing about being on social media and, doing anything. You get all kinds of crazy projections and reflections from people. How do you know what's a good reflection, what's something useful, and what's just something that's unkind and not useful? Well, if you don't really know yourself that well, or if you're always kind of like, your blind spot is your own self-criticisms and your own self-doubt, then any stranger can just randomly say something and feed into all that.
Right.
And that's not a way that we want to be vulnerable when we're out in the world.
Well, and I think if people have, like, let's say they have depression or some kind of mental health condition, that negativity bias can be more amplified. So it could be harder for even to say, oh, I'm going to talk about it in the third person. Oh, I need to be more self-compassionate to myself. I need to have more gratitudes, because then you'd say, oh, well, you don't deserve it. You don't deserve it. So I'm just wondering, when people get into those kind of dialogues, do you want them to have the dialogue and then to look back at it later?
Well, I mean, anybody who's severely depressed or severely anxious should be under the care of a licensed clinical psychologist. And, that person should be informed that they're doing, this kind of a mirror meditation, if that's useful. I think it's great if you're better if you just feel that these things fluctuate from time to time. If you tend to feel a little down about something, or two, like, if you're starting any kind of project, I mean, if you've written books, and this was my first book that I wrote, and there was a lot of ups and downs in the process of doing it. It's not an easy task to do, And so there are days when I feel great, and days when I feel like, oh, I don't know, what am I doing here? Well, this is kind of a crazy idea, And I want to be able to see both parts of me. I want to be able to see the part of me that thinks this is the best thing in the world, and the part of me that thinks this is kind of a dumb idea, and can I tolerate that? Can I tolerate having these different feelings about it? So it kind of, I think it can create more emotional resiliency and more tolerance of different emotions. Because if you can let yourself be really angry and see yourself be really angry and know that you didn't hurt anybody and nothing really bad happened, and you calm down and everything was okay, and then one minute you're really, really happy and on top of the world, it's like you're able to witness yourself having these different emotions, and in some ways that leads you to trust yourself more.
So does that, so it's like you're one step removed. Oh, then I see what's happening now. It's almost like it's you, but it's not you. Is that, but
Well, yeah. And you're kind of watching yourself from a third person perspective.
Right, exactly.
So now I can be like, oh, there I go again, getting really negative about
Yes.
this thing. I know not to make any decisions because I'm in this negative space. I'm going to wait until I feel a little bit better.
Well, I can imagine it could be very useful in relationships. Like, okay, now, just taking a name out of the air, Mary, that is not a good guy for you. How many times do you have to go and have the same thing? And then the other part's going, oh, but he can be so kind and he takes me out to dinner. He brings me roses. It's like going back and forth. What makes you decide to do one thing or another? I guess and that goes into, you said that, oh, this mirror meditation validates hunches and intuition. So how does that work if you're having these kind of conversations with yourself?
Well, it can work because when you first met this person, you had your initial sense, and then you can watch how your sense of them changed over the course of 6 months. So, you're on a big high when you first meet the person. Then over time, you develop more self-doubt. You don't feel as good about yourself. Where did that come from? Kind of a thing, The other thing is, we sometimes have these momentary kind of flashes of people. I wonder if this person's like this. They're probably not like that. If you say that in your video journal, 6 months after you've entered in a relationship, in a business contract, you can validate which of your hunches worked and which really didn't.
I'm laughing here because how many times have I done that in my own life going, I knew that. Why did I trust that hunch? Right. And you did something, even though maybe you knew that in your gut you shouldn't, but you did it anyway and it bit you.
Right. It's like hindsight is 2020,
Yes.
but it's also in your video journal. If you go back and look and you go, oh my gosh, yeah, I did have some doubts about that and it didn't quite. So you can get better at your hunches. And the other thing is, going back to that integrity exercise, if you do, you can get caught up in the moment with people who are very charismatic and have a lot of great, feeling great in the moment. Then you always want to come back to yourself and look yourself in the eye after you have this experience with another person or a group of people who've led you into this kind of state of, feeling great or not feeling great, or really changed your who you feel you are, and come back to yourself so that you kind of stay on top of or stay aware of how other people are influencing you.
So that you really, like I was saying, you have your own better GPS system. Because
Yes.
this amount of self-reflection is giving you much greater insights about how you respond to your world. I think it's just fascinating. And that is one of my last questions is about fostering gratitudes. Can you say a little bit about how this helps? People are reporting to you going, oh, I have more gratitudes now that I've been doing this. How does that happen?
Yes. And I know we oftentimes hear about like things like gratitude and self-compassion as practices. Like we have to practice. Okay. Name every day. You have to name 5 things you're grateful for and recite them off. And that works. The research shows that works, but with the video journaling and the mirror meditation practice, gratitude seems to naturally help well in people. For one thing, if you do it over a period of time and you keep track of what's happening in your life, you again have these experiences when you're striving for something to happen, and then it does, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how hard that was, or how much effort that took. Because oftentimes too, when things happen, we're always like, oh yeah, that was so easy, and we forget about how hard it was, and then also too, I've had over the course of me doing this, developing this program, both of my parents had passed away, and thank you. It's life. It's life, right? They were quite elderly, but it was like, I remember doing it when they were still alive, and I can go back and I can even hear my mom's voice in the background of some of my videos that I've made, and then I just have the gratitude for the things and the people in my life that are no longer in my life, and just, relationships that people have come and gone. And I remember, I have these videos of talking about, oh, I did this cool thing with this person and we did this, and then looking back on it, I go, oh, wow, I'm so grateful that I had those great experiences that I shared with myself in my video journal.
And I have to say, when you just said that, you just lit up, your eyes sparkled. It was really nice to hear you talking about your gratitudes and your mom. So, God, we only have a couple of minutes left. And if there's any parting words you'd like to leave our listeners.
Well, I would just like to say, if this appeals to you, please get my book. There's lots more exercises in it. Don't be afraid to look at yourself. And also, if you feel a little bit like the approach avoid, like, I don't know if I could do it, then you should definitely do it.
So I'm going to say the name of the book again is Mirror Meditation, The Power of Neuroscience and Self-Reflection to Overcome Self-Criticism, Gain Confidence and See Yourself. That is one of the longest titles I think I've had on the show so far. And I just want to say it's been so lovely to talk with you. A lot of the show is about what else is true in our lives. And I can't help but say, when you talk about mirror meditation, we're asking ourselves what else is true about ourselves. And if
Right.
we're living in those places of self-criticism, that just seems like another vehicle that could really be helpful for us.
I love that. What else is true about me? You could say that in the mirror and have it be an open question. And what else is true about me? I love that. And also you can find, I don't know if you're going to put that in the notes, but you can find me at mirrormeditation.com as a way to contact me.
So, okay. Mirror Meditation. Yes. So mirrormeditation.com. So please contact her if you want more information, but go buy her book. And by the way, on Amazon, I went there and I took a look at it, and she had like all these reviews. She's got 5 stars. So I think it's a worthy read. So thank you so much. It was so great to meet you.
Thank you, Elaine.
Yeah, so
great talking with you. Yeah.
And so, and to my audience, until we meet again, just continue to look at what else may be true in your life. I think we have another illustration of another person who's helping people with a very interesting new modality called mirror meditation. Until we meet again.